Hello, everyone. My name is Wits Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Two Ways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be available on podcast by tomorrow. For those listening on Apple Podcast or on Spotify, please leave a rating for the podcast. Now, if you're joining us live, drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Reuben Davids, a chartered accountant who's a lecturer at Wits University. He's also an MC and a content producer. Reuben, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you on your platform, Tooways.
Awesome. Let's jump straight in. Tell us your story. Where do you come from? And maybe even outside of work, who is Reuben Davids? Give us that backstory.
Okay, so Reuben Davids was born and bred in the lovely city of Roses. It's Bloemfontein in the Free State. And I always have a small argument with people in Johannesburg because they say, oh, where is that? Or is it a small town? So to set the record straight, it is the capital city of the Free State, okay? And we do have our own mini Table Mountain, Naval Hill, where we have a massive statue of Nelson Mandela, I'll have you know. But that's essentially where I was born and bred, in probably one of the largest colored communities in in Bloemfontein called Hayderdown. So I was born and bred by my parents. My mother was a nurse. My father is a teacher. So essentially, at school, my dad could help me out, and if I had a cough or a flu, mom could help me out at home. And yes, very interestingly, I started at a primary school called Kutniman. Kutniman is a small primary school on a plot, um, very far from the normal city life in Bloemfontein, very small Afrikaans based school. But I think that's really where most of who I am right now had started. So I recall one of my earlier memories, I think was about 8 years old. One of my teachers, my grade two teacher, actually enrolled me for recitals, interestingly enough. And I think it's probably because I spoke a lot in class. I think I've always been a bit of a chatterbox, as would tell by my profession right now. So I love speaking, and I think that's where my passion really for engaging with people, public speaking, sort of started. At that very young age, I sort of was, trained and groomed and taught confidence in front of an audience, how to address, how to project, and I think that coupled with my extroverted nature is just really how I started developing. For a couple of years throughout my primary school, grade four, grade six, grade eight, even right shortly after primary school, I was involved in these recital competitions. Some of them were national, some of them were provincial within the Bloemfontein sphere. And I think that's when I really knew I love speaking and I love engaging with people. And then my mom, very interestingly enough, started being very strict. So, and it wasn't really a primary school; it was actually a secondary school. So it ended at grade nine. But when I reached grade eight, and I was excited to finish off my secondary in grade nine, it was like I said, Afrikaans school, and I was taught in Afrikaans. My mom said, "Nope, we're going to have to change you to an English medium school," and I was completely upset. If you come from Bloemfontein, you're very used to comfort. Bloemfontein is a small, snug city where everything is within reach, and you tend to really sort of position yourself within your environment. And I was very well established within my primary school or secondary school at the time. And so this was a big life change for me. Where she just uprooted me and said, "You must go into an English medium school. When one day when you get to tertiary education, you are strictly going to be studying in English." And so she had that foresight for me. Like I said, I was very, very, I had internal conflict and external conflict a little bit with that
Can
because now I have
imagine.
to leave my friends. I have to go and learn what handelsvoorraad is in English, right? Which is a very big accounting term. But I look back today and I thank my mother so much for that big change that she made for me back then. It really refined me from an English perspective as well. So now I'm fully bilingual, fluent in both English and Afrikaans at the very least. And I can converse fluently. And when I got to varsity, I didn't have the challenge of, struggling to convert from Afrikaans to English. And at the time I was in university, that's when the big change at the University of the Free State came, where they changed from Afrikaans and English to strictly English medium at the time. And I had that privilege of now sort of being settled within my English um, language at least. So I did high school. High school was pretty fun. My first year in high school, which would have been grade 9, was a big adjustment. It was quite challenging, getting to learn a new route to school, to getting new friends, to obviously learning a new language or being taught in a brand new language. It was all a very big adjustment for me, but eventually got through it, and then finished high school. I had the privilege of being a prefect. Um, so that also again put me in a position where I needed to engage with people, I needed to communicate and speak. And then eventually I made my way into varsity. My transition into varsity was very interesting. How I landed up as a chartered accountant is still baffling to me a little bit, because I recall when we had to select subjects from grade 9 to grade 10, I always said I will never touch accounting even with a broom. It was difficult, it was challenging. And I remember one of my senior friends said to me, "You're going to choose accounting and you'll get through it." And I actually chose accounting. And the reason why I did that was in high school, there was a whole thing when you selected subjects called the Big Six. And from what the information we got back then in the Big Six was that the Big Six opens you up to various different fields, because you have a bit from every sort of industry. You are in the commerce sector, you are in the humanities sector, you are in biology. So if you want to be a doctor, you can be a doctor. If you want to be an accountant, you can be an accountant, if you choose this specific setup of subjects. And so that's how accounting became one of the subjects that I chose. And so when I got to university, I initially applied for medicine. Thankfully, I didn't make it through. I later realized I can't stand blood.
Fine.
So I remember while it was registration period, I spoke to one of the administrators, and they said to me, "You know what? The MBCHB program is full. What else do you want to do?" And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And they asked me, "Oh, what other subjects did you enjoy in high school?" And I said, "Oh, accounting." And they're like, "Oh, your accounting marks are very good. I'm going to enroll you for BIAC." And so that's when my journey with accountancy started. And very, very fruitful journey that I had. During this time, I managed to get a bursary. I was on the Tutuka bursary. I also had the privilege of being involved in various student engagements where I had to speak to students as well. I also decided to be a tutor a little bit for a while. And that's when I learned, you know what, Ruben, you like talking, you are good at accounting. How do we put these two things together eventually? And that's when, towards my final year, I learned of the academic traineeship program, and I just knew that this is exactly for me. And so it was then when I knew that I love the academic space, I love talking, I enjoy accounting. I can put all three of these things and eventually pave my way to becoming a
Oh,
lecturer.
amazing. Amazing. I interestingly had the reverse. So I went to an English medium school in Rabat, Stellenbosch. At the time, they were only speaking, lecturing in Afrikaans. So I know exactly what you mean when it comes to switching languages when you don't want to. But you mentioned something. Well, you're a lecturer. You're lecturing at Wits currently, so you have this experience at Wits. But can you? I don't have many people. I haven't had many people on the show who are from the University of the Free State, and a lot of people have this idea that, oh, I need to go to, when I go to varsity, I need to go to one of these big three kind of things. So I like to give perspectives from the other university options, because from my experience of many universities in South Africa, talking to people and talking to people who've gone there, the quality is very, very good, especially in the chartered accounting space. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience at the University of the Free State?
Okay. What an amazing experience. So the University of the Free State has always been the university that I wanted to go to. I would drive past it in Bloemfontein. I would see it on the news, visit campus sometimes, and I just knew I want to be in this institution. So my experience was absolutely amazing. I think um, one thing I appreciate about the University of the Free State is where it's located. First of all, I think it really allows you fully and holistically develop. I developed at a very, steady pace, and the staff was very accommodating as well. I mean, it's not as big as the University of the Witwatersrand in terms of the classes that I'm seeing right now, but it was big enough for you to meet different kinds of people from different walks of life and for you to progress through that. So I also, that's where I was exposed to people who came from different provinces I've never been to, where I got to engage with people from your Limpopo's, Gauteng, and I just found out how things work there. So I think, yeah, how the setup is at the University of the Free State was very conducive for the kind of development I needed at the time.
No, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And then, I mean, after your experience, you moved to the big city. And how did you find that transition from Bloemfontein to Johannesburg? What did you struggle with the most? And maybe share some tips or how you overcame the things that you struggled with.
Yeah. So by now, we should understand that I'm used to my little cocoon. I'm used to my comfort space. And I recall after my academic articles program with the University of the Free State, I had to go and do articles. I opted to do audit articles, and I wanted to do it in Bloemfontein. And so I consulted with a few of my friends, and some of my elders and so forth. And everyone said to me, "You have to get out of Bloemfontein for your own development. You are comfortable in Bloemfontein, you're comfortable in the city, but you now need to develop beyond that for yourself. You need to learn how different things work, and just getting outside of, I think, your hometown forces you to develop and grow." So it was very daunting and very intimidating. However, there was a comfort for me in that in Johannesburg, I already had a couple of friends, people who had studied before me who had moved to Johannesburg, who I could sort of lean on from this side. So there was a lot of support from that perspective. And then I was very intentional with the audit firm that I chose to work with. At the time, it was RSM South Africa Incorporated. It is a medium-sized audit firm in Randburg. And so Randburg, for me, is a little bit small. It is a little small community from my perspective, what I experienced. And that still allowed me to transition to Johannesburg, but at a pace and at a level where I could still relate with a little bit before I sort of spread my wings. So that transition was pretty comfortable for me in that I stayed very close to the company where I worked. It was medium, so there was a smaller group of people that I worked with. I think my year intake, we were about 30 trainees, which is a manageable number of people to work with. And that sort of allowed me to ease into the big city.
No, makes sense. Interestingly, that 30 trainees is a medium. I suppose in a big city, that would make it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
For the audience, we'll be responding to questions towards the end. So please add your questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them. So I've interviewed a few lecturers on the channel before. And to be honest, I've never met a lecturer who wasn't trying to achieve something more. They're always studying something. There's always something on that list. So my question to you is, what's next on your list? Are you studying something? Are you designing something? If it's not confidential, do you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, so for me currently, I would like to explain this phase of my career as really my early academic career. The switch to Wits for me showed me that academia in itself is quite a big and vast industry, and there's so much you can do and get involved in. So right now for me, it's all about taking in as much as I possibly can, understanding how the industry works so that I can see where exactly in this big puzzle I can position myself. So that's exactly where I am. I think I need to sort of find my feet around the area of how research works, which was quite a surprise for me. I thought lecturers come in, lecture, leave, set their assessments, and that's the end of their day. And I realized that, especially with being with an amazing institution such as Wits, where they pride themselves in research, I think what I've learned is that to teach knowledge or to explain or share knowledge, you have to also create knowledge. And that's where research comes in. And it might not be groundbreaking or something you're discovering a new cell on Earth, but it could be, going and exploring something that has been unexplored and finding out a new answer to that. And that's sort of the exposure that I've gotten through rubbing shoulders with some colleagues. I think that's also another privilege I have with being at Wits, is that some of my colleagues are really big role players within the academic industry. I'm sitting with people who have textbooks out, people who are world-renowned researchers, and I'm learning so much on a day-to-day basis from interacting with them. So this is the phase of my career right now. It's just early academic, figuring out how does research work, because my development up until this point did not really expose me much to that area of research specifically, in terms of how do you do, what tools do you use, what do you research, what is research altogether. And I think this is just about figuring out what that space is. In addition to that, I am still working on my content producing, a study with Reuben, and that was essentially started for me because I realized that studying in itself is a skill that you need to develop. And I appreciate being part of Psycha, because they really instill the values of being a lifelong learner. And so the study with Reuben channel that I started is just for me to sort of share my experiences of how did I learn, or how I am developing the skill of studying and the skill of learning on a more practical basis. I think it's easy to tell someone, oh, you need to study 8 hours a day, but what does that 8 hours look like? How do you make it easy for yourself? How do you make it enjoyable for yourself? I think we can all agree that it's a lot of hard work and you need to make it conducive. So that's exactly where I am
Okay,
right
that
now.
makes sense. I want to double click a little bit on your point on figuring out how research works and how do you research and how do you research. You mentioned it a little bit, but for those of us who have no clue in terms of, they might be thinking of the academic training route or becoming a lecturer. Share us your learnings about research and how it works and what they need to think about if they want to go that way.
Okay. Just a disclaimer, I think I am definitely still a novice and still in my learning process myself, but it all comes down to a question. What question do you have? What question do you have that you think has not been answered as yet? And from what I've learned and from the learnings of my colleagues and seniors, is that it's something that you need to make your own. Now, there, of course, is a blueprint to it, and it gets very technical in certain instances. So it in itself is a trick or a trade that you need to learn. So research is not just Googling, the different onions in the world. It's really honing into a particular question and then going back into, okay, fine, what exists out there? What have other academics and researchers said about this particular topic that you're interested in? And which questions are still unanswered from what has been found? And then it's about really sort of scaffolding down and seeing, okay, how do I now break down to the nucleus of this question and start with, okay, this is my starting point. Okay. And what I've learned is that there's different ways in which you can go about finding this answer. And that depends on what your question is ultimately. From the top of my head, I know there's something like there's what is called qualitative research and quantitative research. So qualitative research is really very human inspired. You want to have interviews with humans. If there's a question about human behavior specifically that you have, you would engage in qualitative research where you would have interviews with them, for example, or you would have them fill out questionnaires and you would analyze and evaluate and debunk what their answers were. Whereas quantitative is very numbers based. How many is the question that you're looking at, or how much is the question that you're looking at? So there's sort of values attached to that, and you need to debunk that. And so there's a lot of theory behind what do you do with the type of question that you have, whether it's qualitative or it's quantitative? And that's sort of what I'm exploring at the
It
moment.
sounds almost like you can answer any question that has that, like if I said I want to understand why the minister decided on the 15.5% VAT rate and not the same or something to that effect, as long as there's an audience for that. Is that correct?
100%. And the nice thing that, or the one thing that I've learned with in the university space is that there's actually committees set up for this. So you essentially go to them, question, this is the data I'm going to explore, and this is the answer that I'm hoping to get out of this. And these are very well experienced and established, researchers themselves, possibly with answering who have looked into the questions that you've looked at, and so they can tell you whether it is feasible or not. So I think with the academic space, with most research questions, there's sort of a permission that you must first be granted, because people look at your question and say, is this a feasible question? Is this a question that has been answered before? Would you be wasting your time pursuing this when there's already an answer out there for it? And that's the nice thing. There's that community that they've established that sort of gives you a bird's eye view of what is out there.
Okay, that makes sense. As we're coming towards the end of the session, are there any last few words from you or anything you'd like the audience to know?
Okay. I think more for the students or those who are currently pursuing any kind of education and learning, I think what was important for me and what still is to just explore your avenues, explore yourself, and figure out through these explorations what you like and what you don't like. Often we sort of, and it's also good to have a goal in mind, but sometimes you find that that's not always, or when you get there, it's not what you thought it would be. For example, when I was studying during university, during my undergraduate years, I was involved in various different things, various organizations that were unrelated to the course that I was doing. But not only did I get some soft skills through those experiences, that's where I learned what I liked. And that's why I eventually ended up being an academic trainee. I've always been someone who liked opening up the options to sort of see what I like and what I don't like. For example, if you look at my 3-year psycho article setup, one of those years I was an academic trainee, 2 of those years I was an audit trainee, and that's why I could figure out, okay, what do I enjoy between the two? What do I enjoy about this? What do I enjoy about that? And I mean, at the end, when I eventually qualified as a CA and I had to make a decision, I then said, okay, in auditing, these were the rewards and these were the benefits I'd gotten from that. And then as an academic trainee, this is what I enjoyed. Now, I knew for sure I'm an extrovert. I love talking. I love engaging with various different kinds of people. The audit space almost, and there's nothing wrong with it, limits you to a specific group of people for an established time. For the next 4 or 5 months, you're going to be working with this particular audit team and only move on to engage with other people thereafter. Whereas for me, I learned that in my academic space, I was engaging with various different people on a daily basis, from colleagues to students from on various different levels, which is something that fueled me. And so eventually, when I had to make that decision, I was so informed because it was of my own experience. And I only had that experience because I opened up myself to exploration. I think that's what people should do. If you are by any chance unsure or questioning what you're doing, try and get involved in different things and see how you respond to that. And then maybe try and pursue that feeling specifically.
I think that's great advice to even try and get involved in things that are not 100% related to what you're studying. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that it's added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Reuben, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.